Thanks, Kenneth. Good morning.
Good morning.
Everybody is fed and ready to go. I'm glad it's not raining, although that could change at any minute. Kenneth, thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Tracy Arrington. I'll go out on a limb and speak out on behalf of Mark and Devin in saying that we're really excited to be here this morning to talk to you about why we feel very strongly that the time is now to jump in and embrace the benefits and the opportunities provided to us by digital transformation. Mark serves as the SVP at Digital and the Chief Digital Officer of Hart Energy. He is providing media research and data globally in the energy industry, so not a small job, certainly. He's focused on technology planning, digital strategy, and operations as well, so I think he's going to contribute quite a bit as we talk today. Devin Nombre, who is a Dell and Edelman alum, who's worked to build brands like the NBA, Sara Lee, AT&T, so no small feat there, serves as the AVP of Marketing at HCA Healthcare, so one of our nation's leading healthcare providers, and he is focused solely on optimizing the patient experience, which I think all of us, no matter what we do, in our 9-to-5 roles can appreciate. It couldn't be more important with where we are with healthcare today. So without further ado, I'm going to walk across the stage and join these gentlemen and start our chat. The long walk.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here. As we get started, I'd love to get a little information from both of you about your career path. What has brought you into digital leadership in healthcare and energy today?
Sure, Mark, you want to go?
Sure. So oddly enough, my background is actually in IT. So I started out in PC support. One of the things I learned very early on is, as a PC support representative, that those internal customers are customers. You have to really kind of understand the needs and the nature of what they're trying to do and not make them feel stupid, because they will never call you back. So you have to understand kind of how that kind of progresses. For me is that I kind of went from that software engineering and then into management and then to the business side, wholly focusing on the digital strategy of Hart Energy. We've been around for 45 plus years. We were originally a traditional print media company. We now, as Tracy mentioned, we're in research and consulting, GIS and data. We have about 15 events a year. Our flagship magazines, E&P Magazine, Oil and Gas Investor, are still around, and they will really never go away. Some people really have this kind of mantra that print is dead, and for us it's really not. And I think that's really kind of a wrong way to look at it. For a lot of us, it's a gateway into the other brands that we have. And then we recently finished a migration of 4 of our flagship sites into one global energy site with roughly 250,000 pieces of content earlier this year. So that is heartenergy.com, and that is really where I focus a lot of my time and effort on the sales, operations, technical strategy, and engineering.
So my path to digital leadership is may have started where maybe a number of you have started, the youngest person in the room syndrome. Way back when I was at Sara Lee, and I worked in the investor relations department, and because I was the youngest person in the room, I got asked to test this internal internet on Lotus Notes. And I'm dating myself, but anyway, that was interesting. It was fun. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm at Johnson & Johnson, working in women's healthcare there, and I don't know if you know their business, but their number one moneymaker is pharmaceuticals. It's not Tylenol, it's not baby powder, it's not baby shampoo or baby oil, it's pharmaceuticals. And so I was asked to, again, partner with IT and build an intranet for the pharmaceutical employees around the globe. But what made this really interesting was it was an intranet that was mobile friendly before the mobile revolution had really happened. So we were building an intranet for Palm Pilots. And, you know, again, it was just one of those things. And so fast forward a few more years, I'm at AT&T. I'm one of the first product managers for their broadband product. Well, how do you sell broadband in a dial-up world? You go after dial-up internet users. And, you know, there's a lot of frustration built into that. So we built campaigns, and this is a terrible thing to say, but we ran ads that looked like videos loading, but there was no video there. It just basically was building on their frustration to say, you ready to see this video? You need faster internet? Click here. So, you know, again, building on those frustrations. But, you know, through the years, I worked, you know, as Tracy said, at the NBA and helped them license their content across all the major social platforms. Work closely in actually trialing the, what do you call it? The verified accounts with individual players and teams. You know, and have done a number of sort of digital firsts with different clients at my time at Edelman. And, you know, at HCA, largest healthcare company in the country, and thankfully they don't rely on marketing to lead the digital transformation there. So they're putting their efforts in healthcare.
I think that's an important point, in that digital transformation is not just exclusive to the marketing function, that it's really changing the nature of business, from operations to supply chain to finance, really looking for efficiencies and building better business, moving from current state to at least future state readiness, if not future state itself. And I know both of you are, like many people in the room, involved in those transformation conversations, whether it is as it relates to marketing or another business function or multiple business functions. Both of you in our previous conversations have shared that you are involved in pushing your businesses forward in that capacity. What was the tipping point for you to know that things were going to need to change, that data was changing the nature of business, and that you needed to jump in and start the work?
So for us at HCA Healthcare, it was a matter of actually getting out of the way a little bit. So it was ceding that digital leadership role to the data scientists who are putting care at the patient's bedside. And so there's a whole line of business with a number of data scientists that are doing a lot of, you know, the big data crunching, the machine learning that's actually improving care across all of the different hospitals we have. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, marketing's role in that is not necessarily pushing the envelope on the big data front. It's more of, well, how can we start to find and mine those stories and tell those stories, mm-hmm. and help support our physicians and help support all of our clinicians to attract patients, to attract physicians to want to practice medicine with us, and attract the nurses who can support the staff there.
I think for us, it was really understanding media consumption habits. So obviously we're heavy on the media side, and you know, we have, in oil and gas, obviously it's very volatile. So understanding the cyclicality of the nature is going to kind of change the market dynamics. And if you think about where things were 5 years ago, they're drastically different than they are now. So understanding that 2015 downturn that hit so many oil and gas companies very, very hard, it kind of gave us a chance to reevaluate coming out of it what it was going to be. So we have paid content models, we also have free content models, and we were trying to understand the dynamic changes of the traditional media content consumption to the digital media content consumption. And a lot of people just look at that as maybe just from the print magazine to the website, but it's also about where else you're getting your information from. So also realizing that, just think of how much Facebook has changed the last 5 years. Think of how much Twitter has changed the last 5 years, and where you're really getting all your information from. Google is one of our biggest competitors, because people will take our type of content, put it into a Google search engine, find something similar and say, oh, I can go find it for free. But then the question is, what's the value that you find from free versus what we're trying to provide? And then also understanding the mobile mindset. From oil and gas, we obviously have the up-and-comers. They're much more mobile-centric, and then we have the guys that have been there forever that still want that book. So we have to be in all realms of the spectrum and being able to provide the right service level for all of those. So for us, it was not getting away from what we were good at, it was expanding into the new digital media era. So that was where we started to focus our online and our app platform efforts, to be coinciding with our traditional print publications that people still look at and value on a daily basis.
I think a lot of us probably had that same story to tell, that you started to notice things changing and realizing it's time to go, right? And I think the subject of our conversation today is focused around the time being now. And I think a lot of us have worked for brands or with brands that maybe have shelved that conversation about data because it's daunting in many cases. It can be expensive to deal with, to make changes, certainly to onboard technology partners, and a little bit soupy because there are so many people in the space right now, so knowing who to trust can be a little bit complicated. But jumping in and understanding that we can't wait any longer. We're going to start having compliance issues here in the U.S. As of January in California. So a lot of the things that have been, the can that's been kicked down the road can't be kicked anymore. We really do need to jump in, but it's inspiring that you both and your organizations have both already started and quite some time ago. Are you scared or excited about what's going on with data and about how fast tech is rolling out right now?
Me being a tech evangelist, I'm super excited. I think there's a lot of really cool things. The difficulty that I think we're all running into in this room is GDPR just hit its first anniversary or birthday, whatever you want to call it. Good, bad, or indifferent, it's here. And what I think is going to be the case is that something similar to GDPR is going to be across America. I don't think that we can expect that is not going to happen. Like with California ruling already, I think it's going to be much more paramount across all businesses. The difficulty that I think we are going to run into is online strategists is personalization. It's very difficult to create personalization around somebody who doesn't want you to know who they are. But then they're going to complain about not having personalized experience. Mm-hmm. So it is somewhat of a catch-22, and you do want to obviously be careful, but you obviously still want to provide the best experience. Like I had made mention earlier this morning, if you never had pizza, you would never crave pizza. It creates this experiential human behavior that you now want this thing. And one of the proof presentation yesterday was a prime example. You go to the Amazon homepage for the first time, and there's nothing that's relevant to you. And then when you log in, everything is relevant to you. But you still had to give some identifiers, some attributes of what you were looking for. Maybe it's purchase behavior or just things that you looked at on the site so that it can create a related feature set. Well, we're doing the same thing on our site, and it's trying to understand your behavior and interest in what you're doing on the site so we can provide content recommendations that are beneficial to you. We have our trending content that's really based around how many clicks or how many views or the engagement time, but that could be a hot story that is related more to the M&A market, not really to the engineering market. So trending doesn't necessarily mean trending for everyone. It just means what's the most popular right now. But if you look at it from what that engineer is looking for in his personalized experience, it's going to maybe be different than the M&A analyst and her experience. So it's really trying to accomplish a lot, and it really takes a significant amount of data to do that. And I think where we're at in today's age of technology, we're actually able to understand those much larger and complex data sets better than we've ever been able to do before, just because of computational power that is much more open and available to the masses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the marketer's dilemma. because we swim in data, we love the data, but GDPR and other privacy concerns do limit us in how we can use that data. And pretty soon it's going to be in how we collect that data. From a compliance standpoint, we operate hospitals in the UK as well, and so we're under GDPR today, and that is something that our teams over there have to be cognizant of and train around. Like, there is compliance training that comes with that. Like Mark said, I do believe that it's coming here for the U.S. I don't know in what form, but in the news recently, you've seen how Google and Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook have all been hauled in front of Congress at different times to answer for how data is being collected, what that data is being used for. As a marketer, it kind of pains me a little bit, but as a consumer, yeah, I want to have my cake delivered by Amazon, and I want to eat it too, but I don't want too much information going out the door at the same time.
Well, and I think compliance and data privacy certainly guiding the headlines today. As marketers, we've had these conversations for quite some time. Anybody that's worked in healthcare or finance certainly has had compliance conversations, data privacy conversations. The change now is that consumers are jumping into the mix and starting to have an opinion. I don't know if you'd agree with me in that there's a pretty significant lack of education among the general population about what's going on with data, how data is being aggregated and used. And I've had more than one conversation with brands that feel pressure to educate their consumer base about what's going on, really getting in front of legislation in California, and we have 2 pieces of legislation pending here in Texas on that very subject, in addition to what's going on in a dozen other states. So do you all feel any pressure to educate when it comes to data, to really get in front of that compliance conversation?
Yeah, I mean, this, again, being in the healthcare space, we, having worked in energy before and entertainment, and this is by far the most compliance heavy regulated industry. I was telling someone earlier today, it takes me 6 minutes to boot up my laptop because it gets unencrypted and then decrypted when I shut it down. And so our company and many companies in healthcare take patient privacy very seriously. There are legal ramifications where individuals are held legally liable for data leaks. And that's just the reality we live in. So for us and employees, at HCA Healthcare, we have 16 hours of mandatory compliance training every year. And it is, everybody knows that, and it's ingrained in the culture now to know that this is important, this is critical, no matter your function in the organization.
Mark, how does compliance and data privacy influence what you're doing and what you plan to do?
I think it's really understanding the factor of where our customers come from. And we have offices in Singapore and Brussels. We do a lot of work in the Middle East. So we're not, just North American focused. So we really do have to understand the ramifications of what all of that represents. As far as, product development and those sorts of things, you have to take those into account. And then also your back-end infrastructure systems. How they were built 10 years ago, you can't build them the same way anymore. You have to have a lot different architectural understanding of what that represents to be in compliance. So a lot of that is refactoring or re-architecting old systems just to be able to accommodate something now. That's expensive, it's timely, just trying to make sure that you're quote-unquote future-proof is just almost an insurmountable task. So it's continually trying to make sure that when you're building something, when you're trying to gain a new audience, to understand what your data privacy factors and concerns are before you just jump in. It's almost part of the business plan at this point.
Right. I'd agree with you. So let's use the buzzword of the moment and pivot. to talk about AI and machine learning. And we're seeing these tools coming faster and faster. Things that we've been dreaming of being available are actually available now. And if they're not here, they're coming very quickly. What are your favorite AI/ML tools? How do you see them impacting your business? Is it short term? Is it long term? What are you most excited about in that space?
I'm really excited about personalization again. You know, from our online content standpoint, I think it's a really big deal. As I may mention, we're using AI for content recommendations now, and it's really based on behavioral science. But what we are also looking at is how it can help further that. So we have daily newsletters, we have weekly newsletters, and they're very vertical, specific, or frequency related. But they don't necessarily have a full meaning to everyone every single time. Now, if we wanted to build out a newsletter that was based on every single person's interest level in here, what is that, 60, 70 different single newsletters per person? That is never going to happen. You'll never have enough staff to do that. But the artificial intelligence and machine learning, however, can. So we're actually looking at doing that later this year. So we're going to be building a new product that is wholly geared around your personalized interest. But we're also looking at it from an advertising standpoint too, that advertising can now relate specifically to a user persona. Right now we have it associated to content, which before we just had a run of sites. So we've already started to push the envelope here. But I think looking at it that, you know, you have a very specialized niche audience like that we have, and you want to get in front of a very significant small subset, but you know that subset is going to be your buyers. It's not necessarily always about mass, it's about quality. And so we're looking at it, how we can create dynamic advertising experiences, dynamic content experiences. So you get to the page, again, like Amazon does, when you log into our site, you'll be able to see the content that's geared towards you, not just geared towards everyone. And also from a dynamic newsletter perspective. So we want every single person that, you know, has access to our site to have a newsletter that's based on your interest. What we're using, Treasure Data, is our customer data platform. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that or have a CDP, but I think it's really important and very impactful on the things that you can do with that. So if we can connect our website and our CDP with our email automation system and create a personalized experience for you, how much more valuable is that to you than just getting the most recent news? Most recent news may not be relevant to you. There may be something very important that was missed just because of a recency basis versus a value basis. So we're really pushing the envelope this year on creating an experiential nature of what we're trying to accomplish, because experiences are valuable.
So in our case, again, at HCA Healthcare, we're taking the machine learning and the AI for marketing and basically handing that to our trusted agency partners. At the company itself, though, this is critically important because at the heart of it is all about healthcare and really moving healthcare closer to the bedside of the patient. We're using machine learning to really push the envelope there. An example of that is we have almost 30 million patient encounters a year. So we have digitized and cataloged every patient record that comes through the door. We've even digitized and cataloged the audio dictations that the physicians use in their notes when they visit a patient. And this was about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now. One of the doctors decided, let's see if we can actually put this machine learning to work. And so it searched out of, this is probably close to 60 million patient records, the word shadow in the dictation in the doctor's notes. And I don't know, pulled maybe 10 or 11,000 records. And then they went in and looked to see what those patients were coming in for, and if there was a chest x-ray involved. Because if you've ever had a chest x-ray and you see a shadow in the lung, it could mean a number of things. So they contacted all 11,000 of these patients, had them come back in to get revisited, did follow-up test screenings for lung cancer, and actually discovered early-stage lung cancer in about 400 patients, and ended up being able to provide treatment for those 400 patients because it was treatable at that early stage. And this was directly because of the machine learning and going back and accessing data that we already had, and that we already had, no way to humanly look at, but we were able to actually save lives around that. So it's being deployed and being used in a way that goes beyond marketing in our case.
That's phenomenal to actually have that bring life to people, certainly beyond marketing and top of mind in the healthcare conversation. And to have a one-to-one experience finally delivered, I think many of us have been seeking that for quite some time, talking about how much money we waste in spending in marketing and media. The old adage that half of your money is wasted, you just don't know which half, right? As we move into a one-to-one, a true one-to-one experience, not only delighting, entertaining, but actually making a marked difference in whether or not you have an early diagnosis of something that could kill you. That's really powerful. I would love to ask, as you're applying AI and ML, we're freeing up a lot of time, right? AI ML replaces or takes care of a lot of the mundane tasks that either we've done or our staff has done, and it allows you some additional time in your workday. What do you want? How do you want to spend that extra time, or how do you want your teams to spend that extra time?
Well, it's funny, and we joke about this internally that, hey, the robot apocalypse is coming, and hey, copywriter, it's going to take your job. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Not really the case, but we actually do ad testing, A/B testing of ads through machine learning now, and it's wonderful. The agency has set it up for us, and what do we do with that extra time? Well, we actually get to focus, and we get to strategize, and we get to sort of do that higher level thinking about how we approach the marketplace, how we want to interact, and how we want to define, patient experiences. Or, in our case, we're also looking at how we attract employees and help build a cohesive path for them to come work for us, come practice medicine with us. There's a whole host of things we do with that extra time. It's wonderful.
Clean the break room, right?
There's that too.
And for us, I think it's really just having more time to further understand what is valuable to people. Maybe because we have people come on the site, they'll maybe bounce around, some will stay on, some will not. The more that we can keep them engaged, the more we can understand what they're actually trying to accomplish, the better we can make enhancements to them. Different folks are going to need different things. If we need to create a new data product or something that they're looking for that we didn't have before, or if there's something that we did actually add on to it that nobody cares about. Like, you have to be able to even understand the cons from your decisions as well too. And I think some of that is really important for people to take into account. Not everything is going to be good. You should actually be able to learn some bad from it too, so that you can, quote unquote, learn from your mistakes. So I think we're trying to take that into account as well. The difficulty is sifting through all of the data. And if I can have more analysis around that and less just like hopes and dreams and let's throw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall, then I think that is just much more valuable from a productivity standpoint.
Sure.
I like spaghetti, so.
The dream is to actually have the data that we're sitting on become actionable. And Mark, you mentioned earlier about the cost of moving into digital transformation and investing in tools and in platforms that will help us visualize and take action on the data that we're sitting on. Oftentimes that's a C-suite decision. As you all are navigating the digital landscape, what do those conversations with the C-suite look like? What are their hot buttons when it comes to actually saying, yes, let's move forward, let's take this on?
It always starts with cost, obviously. But one thing that I have made mention to people is that I like to ask for forgiveness and not permission, which doesn't necessarily always go over well, but sometimes you have to really make a dynamic decision, unfortunately. And sometimes what you can do with that is provide results. If you have no results and you just have theoretical insight and what you've read online, that this is going to change the world, and then you don't have any real emphasis on what it's going to do for your business, but you know you need it just because, it is a difficult conversation. However, the difficulty with digital transformation is a lot of times it's expensive up front, but over the course of time, it actually does provide significant ROI. It may be 2, 3, 5 years, which that is probably the hardest conversation to have, is that when are we going to be able to recoup this cost, and what is it going to do for us in the long run? Well, if you can get more clients, like everybody in here is trying to do, based on this, then it's a win. It may be a long-term win, but it also may be a short-term win too. If you can do some data deduplication or some data cleanup with your transformation efforts, then that can go a long way as well. How many people in here have dirty data? Half of you are lying, because there's so much more dirty data out there. The problem is you may not even necessarily know that you have it. And trying to fix that today, what that's going to mean tomorrow, again with GDPR and other compliance related issues, it's very, very difficult for that. So it's trying to also understand regulations from a government level, that there's nothing that we can do as a for-profit business except for to comply. Well, even compliance is expensive. So unfortunately, some of those things are harder conversations, but if you can show the proper business case for it and how it's actually going to be able to positively impact, your internal team and your client, and then your future, if you're kind of creating a longer term opportunity for you, that becomes a better C-suite and board level conversation. And then if you can understand this is going to be an investment year or a couple of investment years, and here's the long-term ROI on that, then it's a much more beneficial conversation. But I do agree that it does take executive sponsorship and buy-in.
Yeah, and the other, I'll everything that he said, I agree with. You've got to also think of this a little bit as job security, because as this thing evolves and as things change, you've got to have your eye on the horizon on what's coming next, the regulations, and how do you account for and adjust for that. And in the healthcare space, again, I am happy to have our data scientists do what they do, because they are really pushing care and pushing the limits on how that care can be brought into all the communities where we operate. From our standpoint, yes, we'll support that and help tell that story, but it's really looking at them and saying the business is going to be made, it's a make or break for the business on whether or not we can provide that care and do it in a timely fashion.
I think a lot of us are challenged with that, regardless of our role, in how to have those conversations and make them meaningful. Because I think it's easy to fall prey to the panic around what to do with data and how to make sure that you're compliant. There's a lot of defensive posturing, and if we can move that conversation to, yes, we do need to play defense, but also building business case, playing offense, being proactive instead of reactive, getting buy-in, I think it's probably pretty important to all of us. I have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the floor. What's the most interesting thing you've learned from data in your current role or otherwise?
I would say behavior. There's just so many things that you learn about people just by sifting through their interactions. I mean, it's really kind of crazy. If you think about it, a few years ago, there was the chatbot revolution, right? Everybody was going to do chatbots. It was going to be the wave of the future. You wouldn't even need customer service anymore. It didn't take place, obviously. And so it's also understanding the interpretation of what's coming versus what really is coming. Because everybody saw that and thought it was really going to be a significant revolution for AI. This was the whole, robots and AI coming together, and they're going to be able to learn your thoughts. And the only way that it learns anything is for you to teach it, just like a human. Artificial intelligence is only as intelligent as it's taught. So it has to have meaningful information behind it in order for it to actually prove to be useful. And so I think those sorts of things, being able to understand human behavior and mimic that, that's what artificial intelligence really represents. And then the machine learning underlying from that, the example that I used this morning is like, you have a cat, you have a dog, and you have an alligator. Well, a computer is only going to know that they're animals, but they're only taught that a dog and a cat, generally speaking, is a pet, and an alligator most likely is not a pet. But it has to be taught that. Otherwise, it's never going to know. And it's the same, same thing with obviously much more complex data sets.
It's interesting, but I feel like how we interact with that data and the fact that our screens have been getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and moving from a room and a desktop to a phone and in your pocket and now on your wrist. To me, that's fascinating because we're still wanting to get the same kind of information, but we're forcing ourselves to look smaller and smaller at how we actually consume it. Mm-hmm. And so I think it is, maybe one day we are going to be Minority Report and have all this stuff big again in front of us in a virtual way. But that's fascinating.
I think both of your points are so valid. Data teaches us things that we never could have imagined, sometimes in a comical way. My background is in marketing, advertising, and specifically media. And the most surprising thing I learned working on a whiskey brand, as we were going to the data to find out what media consumption patterns look like for whiskey drinkers, investing in the print space, you're thinking ESPN, you're thinking Maxim. Lo and behold, the top publication among heavy whiskey drinkers is Better Homes and Gardens magazine. That was an eye-opener, followed closely by AARP. So you never know what the data is going to tell you. Ladies on porches. So at this point, I'd love to open up to questions. Does anyone have questions for the panel? Yes, sir. Oh, we have the mic.
I'm going to throw it.
You ready? Yeah. Hey there. We are relying so much on what the data is telling us now. How do we know when our data scientists are lying to us?
That's a great question. From the standpoint of the healthcare space, everything is it has a history of being peer reviewed, and there's certain things and guidelines that guide how that data can be used and what it is and how many times it has to be duplicated and reproduced and reproducible. And so for us, I feel like we have somewhat of a higher trust in those scientists and that team because they've been brought up in that world. This isn't necessarily something new to them as a discipline. I think we have more problems with the actual data entry and data input than the analysis is happening, and that's where we actually have the questions come up. Is the data valid? It's literally, are the fields valid, and is the actual data there valid versus what the scientists have come up with?
I think for us, it's bringing them into the business conversations and understanding what you're trying to accomplish versus just saying, hey, go figure this all out. Because at the end of the day, they're only going to know what they know. And if you're trying to understand a bigger, broader business objective, and you have the meeting in the boardroom, and you come out and say, hey, Mr. Data Scientist, or hey, Mr. Data Analyst, go figure this out. And they're like, well, I wasn't even part of the context, so they're missing a lot of that. So I try to bring my guys into earlier meetings just to try to understand what we're trying to accomplish before it gets to their desk. Even if they don't have any input during the meeting, just understand everybody's kind of mindset around it, because everybody has a different idea of what data is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When they know the decision that their data is going to impact, it helps them get the right analysis lens on that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Someone's got to have a question. I want to see that microphone chucked across the room.
That's the best part.
Yeah.
That was a long
hand
throw.
off.
That was a good
It was a
throw.
toss.
So do you have any general formulas that you use? Like, because I'd say the problem that we have is just we have so much data, and then it's a question of prioritization there. I guess, do you have any basic top-level formulas that you use, both in figuring out what your priorities are, and also maybe wormholes and things like that to avoid?
So what I had our data analysts do was go around and interview all the stakeholders to understand what they are trying to accomplish in their own business lines, because everybody's line of business is going to be slightly different in what they're trying to accomplish. For instance, with our conferences, they need attendees to the shows, and they need exhibitors and sponsorships. For our print publications, one of them is a controlled circ with advertising, another one is the paid circ that also has advertising. The digital side, we have free subscribers that are just newsletter subscribers, then we have paid subscribers, then we also have advertisers, and we also have our content marketing platform, Industry Voice, that's more of providing thought leadership. So in order for them to really understand what to create, they have to understand what the objectives are. Some of them I do think have to a certain extent, framework to work off of. But one of the things that we're really trying to dive into now is multi-touch attribution. And really trying to understand the offline to online conversion. And we can look at if somebody comes, say, from Facebook or from an email campaign or something like that, and they get through, and sure, they get to the website, and then they buy and they convert. What we can't tell yet is what type of content is actually valuable enough for them to hit subscribe and then go to it and pay. So we're currently working on that whole formula, and that multi-touch attribution is very complicated, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, from our standpoint, again, we have trusted agency partners that we task with developing that for us. We prioritize for them. So, our team will let them know who it is we're trying to go after, in what time frame, and in what budget. And agencies go out, formulate a couple of options for us. We come back, review it as a strategy team, and then select, where we want to go with that.
I think we have time for one final question.
I'll throw that thing.
We'll test his arm this morning.
And aim.
Here we go. Yeah.
Where do I talk? Okay. You talk about with the data, most of the stuff you talked about is really internal out. My question ties back to something Celeste said yesterday about really talking to the customer and asking them what they want. My question is, how often do you do that, or do you do that? And how do you focus those questions to get the data that you're looking for?
So that's a great question. So I had mentioned this earlier, 30 million patient encounters a year across all of our hospitals. We give a hard copy survey and an online survey to every patient that comes into one of our hospitals. They fill that out. It's done by a third party. We get the data back on what went right, what went wrong. We also encourage our patients to go online and review us on Google, Yelp, and other platforms, Health Grades. And this actually has been a relatively new initiative we're getting those reviews, those online ratings and reviews, tracking them, taking that directly to the nurse teams who can address the issues we're finding online. And it's changing behavior in the hospitals based on what we're seeing online. It's a great tool, great system. The one we use is Binary Fountain.
So we do a couple of things. So we will do a generalized survey. We'll send it out to people in our database, both, known subscribers and known, traffic and those sorts of things. But we also added on the new site Hotjar. So somebody mentioned Hotjar yesterday. They were showing the screen of how they're using it. And we'll actually, originally we just had kind of a general feedback form on there, and then we would ask, do you want us to contact you? And so what we would have our customer service do is they would compile all those questions and divvy out, who it needed to go to. If it was a sales-related question, it would go to the sales team. If it was operations or editorial focused, it would go to our managing editor. We changed that now to be more specific to different types of content or data products that we have. What are you most interested in? Just from what we're currently providing as far as the product features that are there, so that we can now start to understand more on a one-to-one basis really what people are needing. And so what we did from that was we actually took that data and we did a complete update on some of our data products. We actually just created an interactive mapping component to what we have as our drilling activity highlights, because that seemed to be the #1 thing that people were asking about. So we had it was more of a directory type structure on it. We created it to be much more interactive and fulfilling, so you could actually see where that activity was taking place throughout the world. And a third component to what we're doing as far as eliciting feedback is there was an email that just sent out on my behalf this week to expired subscribers, asking why they expired, why did they not renew? Because I want to get that direct feedback, not from a sales standpoint, but from a product feature standpoint. What did we not do that you would have needed? And so because I wanted to do that on a much more personal nature, because I'm actually responding back to those folks directly myself to see what we can do, not just to try to get them back, but understand where we have failed so that we can continue to improve, because that's always going to be the factor. What do we need to do for the next folks that are coming in?
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining today. I think it's been a great panel. I appreciate your time and your insights. I think it's given us a whole lot to think about, consider. I'm still thinking about those lung cancer diagnoses and how important that is.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.